Hello, my friends, and I hope you're having a fantastic day. Today, we are going to talk about Assassin's Creed, but only kind of, sort of. I'm obviously not playing the game. I have zero interest, but there are some topics around the game that obviously spark some thoughts in me. So, first, we're going to deal with Assassin's Creed Canon mode, which we've already talked about once before. When I first heard of this idea, I thought how absolutely ridiculous, and I still think how absolutely ridiculous. Realistically, we are in a watering down of many different genres right now. So many things right now are saying, hey, I'm an RPG, but not really giving you the RPG experience. It's shallow, it's uninteresting. Your choices have no effect because they don't have to worry about accounting for your choices in the next games. There aren't real RPGs. They aren't. They don't want to give you multiple real endings. They kind of want everything to end up in the same place. And that really started to kind of show Mass Effect 3 is when people, I think, really started to realize that this was happening when they switched from, the individual endings. And then your choices really only mattered in an explosion color. It didn't have any real weight or effect. Now, there are still a few games there were still a few games that actually gave an RPG experience, an experience where you went into the game, your choices mattered, they're storyline heavy, and you actually build your character. This has been watered down with the idea of action RPGs, with throwing RPG elements into various games and then tacking the words RPG on to say, hey, this is an RPG, an attempt to get RPG players. And of course, it has worked to varying degrees. Assassin's Creed Shadows, though, really shows how poorly they understand the RPG crowd. If you want a linear game, that's fine. Don't call your linear game an RPG. Call it an action game. Call it an adventure game. It's not the same thing as an RPG. Much like everything now is a Souls-like. Everything has the Souls-like combat, or it's a roguelike. Everything is roguelike now. You have a roguelike poker game that won Game of the Year as an indie game. And it's like, okay, so if you can just tack these tags on with no meaning, at what point do we, the gamers, stop trusting that? And I know many of us have. For example, I don't trust that something coming out is an RPG just because they say it's an RPG, for obvious reasons. I'm used to things that are much more in-depth, much more thought out, well-written, have actual choices with actual consequences, and not just something that gives you the pretend illusion of choice. And because they've gotten away with the pretend illusion, for a while there, they had the illusion down really well. They were able to lead you to the same point in the game, despite the fact that you made different choices, without making you feel like your choices didn't matter at all. Because writing in gaming has gone so far downhill, it is basically impossible for them to do that anymore. Now you see it just in the dialogue choices you're given alone, or even in the reactions to the dialogue choices that you're given. And now, because they understand that when they tack RPG onto their game, they're going to lose some people because not everybody wants to, make choices. They've put in a canon mode, which, as this title says, gives you the official RPG experience, which if you are not making the choices, you are not having an RPG experience. You are watching a movie. That is not an RPG experience. But it'll cost you almost it'll cost you almost every romance option and all dialogue choices too. Yes, because it's the canon mode, because it's the mode where you just watch the game. You don't play the game. You don't actually role play. You don't do anything. You watch the game. That is the entire point of that mode. Now, if you are someone who wants that kind of mode in an RPG, I don't know what to tell you. Other than maybe go play a different game other than an RPG, because you don't want to play an RPG. That is not what you want. You might think you want an RPG, but that's not what you want. You want a game with a straightforward storyline and combat. That's what you want. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with wanting that. What is wrong is when game developers decide we're going to try to make both sides of these diametrically opposed groups happy and then not make anybody happy. Because that's what they're doing. Instead of actually focusing on making a game in an actual genre, they're shoving everything together and coming out with this convoluted mess that nobody actually gives a fuck about. And nobody's happy. Nobody's enjoying it. Yes, you can say that 2 million players have enjoyed Assassin's Creed in the first 2 days. Maybe that number's gone up. I don't know. I haven't been keeping track. You can say, but the games like this are selling well. But in the end, they're not really leaving the same kind of mark other games are. Baldur's Gate is actually a really well done RPG. Whether you like the combat system or not, the actual writing, the fact that you can make choices, the fact that your choices have consequences, and you can literally lead yourself into many different endings. You can kill people in your party. You can kill people that you meet. You can do all sorts of things and actually have an impact on the game world around you. It actually changes things. That is an RPG. If you can't actually change the world, in my opinion, and feel free to argue with me, if you can't actually change the world through your actions, I don't think it's a real RPG. I think you might play a role, but it's not the same as an actual role-playing game. And that might sound like a fine distinction, but realistically, when it comes down to definitions, that's what it's about. It's about technicalities and things like that. And it's okay to have those lines. The fact that so many lines have been blurred in terms of definitions and genres is part of why it's a problem. And that's not to say you can't cross genres or that things shouldn't ever cross genres. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that things should never just be genre specific. And if you are going to combine genres, you have to actually know how to do it. You have to do it well, or you come out with a mess. Assassin's Creed Shadows isn't bombing. It's not an abject failure. And honestly, I think it's doing exactly what Ubisoft wants it to do. Because Ubisoft isn't interested in selling video games to people. They're not. They've already stated that. They've stated specifically that you should get used to not owning your games. So the fact that they're not selling individual copies to individual people, they don't care. Because their entire purpose is to get people on their subscription service. Because once you're on the subscription service, they can sell you all sorts of microtransactions. They can sell you battle passes on single player games with mobile game like monetization, where you can buy this thing that helps you, or hell, even gacha game monetization, where you buy this thing that will speed up this process for you so you can buy this skin for this character so that while you're doing your daily or your weekly tasks in Shadows, you can do it looking cool. Honestly, that's not something I've ever really gotten into, so I don't understand it. But I do know it's a model that works, or else games like Genshin Impact wouldn't be making money. And they are making money. They're making tons of money. And that's the type of thing they're aiming for. They're aiming for literally a cross between like Fortnite's battle passes and the gacha games drops and time sync avoidance stuff. I don't remember the exact words for it. I'm sure you understand what I'm saying. But that's what they want. And that's why they don't care that when it says 2 million players, it's not 2 million copies. It's how many people have now signed up for the Ubisoft subscription that might be tricked into it. Much like a gym subscription. How many people are going to sign up for this, maybe forget they even have it, and keep paying us money until we release the next game that they might sign on and play? Or how many people will sign in and that we can get caught on this train of loot drops and battle passes? How many people can we get sucked into that? Because that is what they want. That is where they see their money. They want to live service single player games. That's always, in recent times, been the drive. Ubisoft's wanted it. EA's wanted it. To some degree, Steam has said, no, we're not letting you do that. But that's only in regards to things like ads in the games, as opposed to the battle passes and stuff, because Steam does have it set up so that they can do that kind of thing through Steam. They just have to be very specific with what you're going to get and when you're going to get it. And as consumer friendly as Steam has been for the most part, with the exception of the fact that when you buy your game from them, you don't own it any more than you own it if you buy it through Ubisoft. I'm not surprised they did that because I'm sure they get a kickback from that too. And I know a lot of people are focusing on the fact that, oh, we're not getting sales numbers. Oh, we're not getting sales numbers. But the fact is, Ubisoft doesn't care about the sales numbers. It's not that they're trying to, well, it kind of is that they're trying to trick everybody, but they're not trying to trick everybody for the same reason that people think. They're trying to trick everybody to go and buy their service. They're trying to make it look like their service is a good thing, that with 2 million people playing and without flooding Steam with people, then maybe there is something to this service. I personally, and I have stated this before, I do not believe in games as a service. I think it is bullshit. And while I understand for some people, they may see it as a convenience, a nice way to have all these games or access to games for a limited period of time and only spend a small amount of money and play more games than they would normally be able to. If you're someone who has the ability to play games all the time, yeah, I can see where it might benefit you. Someone like myself who does not have as much time as I would like to have to play video games, I would be wasting my money. I buy a couple games a year at this stage just because I know I can't play all the games I already have. My backlog is so huge that I could never buy a game likely for the rest of my life and still have games left over to play after I died. And yet, I will still buy more games. I'm still thinking about getting Karma: The Dark World. But Wedding first, Karma later. And actually, I'll probably get Expedition 33 before I get Karma. But that is not this conversation. To backtrack a little into the RPG thing, yes, there are things that are technically RPGs or that have been called RPGs where you don't have a whole lot of direct effect on the world. JRPGs, for example. You don't normally get a lot of direct effect on the world, but there are certain things that you are capable of doing. Final Fantasy VII comes to mind, and choosing who you date, and a few other things. Persona 4 I played through. And there are always little things like, who you can get into your team or who you don't get into your team. Maybe someone that you can kill along the way that you didn't have to. And that is a level of RPG. There is obviously an RPG spectrum, but I think we are slowly moving from a spectrum to a point where what you were calling an RPG just isn't an RPG. You just put the title on there because you wanted to try to attract people who like RPGs, and then you put in some light RPG elements. And some people like light RPG elements. Again, that's fine. It just doesn't make the game a full RPG. I just wish they would be more honest with their advertising instead of saying a canon mode gives you the official RPG experience, because you're not getting an RPG experience. You're not. You're getting an action game experience or an adventure game experience. Adventure game is probably the better way to put it, because you are not actually doing anything to affect the world. You're not even trying at that point. You're just watching the game play, and then you're doing the fights. That's it. And again, if you're someone who enjoys doing that, I don't have anything against it. I just don't like the label being misused. I'm going to say that a lot because I know sometimes people get sensitive about that shit. And someone's still probably going to get pissed off about it. That's just the way that goes. But the fact that we've reached the point where someone would create what they call an RPG game, and I'll be honest, I haven't played any of the Assassin's Creed's game. I take that back. I played some of the first Assassin's Creed game. Wasn't for me. Didn't play anymore. I didn't like the combat, and I didn't like the hiding, and it didn't jive, so I didn't play it. I had other games I would much rather be playing at that point in time. So I can't speak to how heavily RPG it was in the past. From what I can tell, there were some elements, but it didn't have a canon mode. And of course, there were always limitations to it, since there was a modicum of historical accuracy they tried to strive for, since it was kind of a historically based game, obviously with caveats to their storylines. But I would really like to see developers just be a little more honest about what they're doing. Or at least I would like to see, I guess, gamers realize that just because someone puts a label on a game doesn't mean that is what the game is. Not everything's a roguelike. Not everything's a Metroidvania. Sometimes it's just a side scroller. And calling it a Metroidvania is just an attempt to sound fancy. And a good side scroller is fun. So there shouldn't be an attempt to make it sound like something it's not. But so many games seem to be afraid of being in a niche, which is ridiculous. Because when you do a niche well, it has a tendency to spill over into other people who may not generally enjoy that niche. A great game will expand past its normal reach every time, without having to lie about what kind of game it is, without having to say, hey, this is an RPG, but it's also an action game. It could just be an RPG and people will still go in and enjoy it. Despite the number of people I saw crying and kicking a fit about the fact that Baldur's Gate 3 is a turn-based game, still plenty of people played it. And tons of people enjoyed it and was wildly popular. And that's despite it being what we're constantly told gamers don't want. That not enough gamers want XYZ type of gaming. It was one of those things that really pissed me off in the discourse around Dragon Age the Veilguard. One of the reasons that did not feel like a Dragon Age game was the fact they totally revamped the battle system and went into something that was far more action-oriented. Yes, most people maybe didn't pause or use the strategy system, but it was still part of the game and it gave something to the game that people loved. And changing it went too far. They changed too much of the game to be that game anymore. Now, from what I can gather for Assassin's Creed Shadows, it is still basically an Assassin's Creed game, just with a little bit of extra stuff. Most people I see say it's an okay game. It's not fantastic. It's not the best thing ever. They've had an okay time with it. They didn't hate it, but they didn't love it either. And sometimes, I think in Ubisoft's case, maybe that's enough. I don't know. We'll find out. The future will always do what it's going to do despite what we think. But for me, it's just every time I look at this article title, I get angry again. Because what did you expect from a canon mode? If it's going to be canon, it has to be the one way. So what choices are there for you to make? You don't get to decide the canon if your game has a canon mode. It's not like Dragon Age, where they actually made an effort to account for your choices from game to game. Thus, you created your own canon. No, they don't want to do that anymore. They don't want to give that to us anymore because it's too much work. They can't stand the idea of doing the work that it would take to give us a good game. And that is part of the problem in general, especially in AAA gaming. They don't want to put in the work. They just want people to take the game as they're making it and not put in the effort to actually be extraordinary in some way. And I think that's the part that gamers find the most frustrating in general. It isn't that these games, well, I mean, it is partly that these games suck. And yes, it is, of course, the DEI and all that other stuff, but that plays into the overall issue. It's not the only issue, but it's definitely a part of the issue before I get a whole bunch of those comments. Oh my God. Yes, I understand DEI is a problem, but it's not the only problem. Just saying. There are plenty of non-DEI people involved in this who still don't want to put in the work. I watched a video by Jarrell this evening. And for those of you who haven't seen Jarrell, he is Sungrand Studios. He is a game designer. Makes Nintendo games. He's made some for the Wii U and for the Switch and for the Nintendo DS. And he was going over Xenoblade Chronicles X and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet and discussing why Xenoblade Chronicles X looks so much better than Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. And overall, the reason for it was they used their own game engine. The people who built it knew what they were doing. They knew when to apply shaders, but they also make sure that they use them in a way that is more intelligent. They customize, well, for one, they're using their own freaking game engine, and that gives them a huge advantage in that they can change just about everything they want. But of course, I mean, there's so many different comparisons between the two teams. One obviously has far more experience. The other one keeps getting rotated out. So the people who are in don't really know what they're doing. So they can't create the same amount of depths with the same tools. They can't do it with even more advanced tools either because they don't really understand what they're doing. And that is how you get an older game that looks better than a newer game with more advanced technology and better assets used within it. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff. I do recommend watching his video on this. This was a really fantastic video. I'll have it linked down in the description if you're curious to watch it. I really enjoyed it. So if you're interested in learning more about how games operate and what goes on behind the scenes so that you can get a better understanding of why we're experiencing some of these problems we're experiencing in gaming, I do recommend his channel highly. He is really spot on about all of it because he is a game developer. He understands so much of this, and it's really good information to have. That said, I guess I just wanted to voice my frustration about the fact that there really isn't enough genre-specific stuff. And I guess this is me whining about the AAA sphere because I know you look into independent and AA games, and there's plenty of actual RPGs and plenty of games that fit their niche because when you're a smaller studio, it's much easier designed to a niche, and you're more likely to attract a following at that point. It's when you grow bigger that you start getting hungry and start looking for things that maybe you can combine in, but that's a whole separate issue. Anyway, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Feel free to argue with me. Anyway, I look forward to reading your comments. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please like, comment, subscribe, and turn on the notifications. If you really liked it, you can feel free to share it around, and I will catch you later.